I just realized for this entire video, my camera was also recording my audio on top of the mic, so hopefully my editor can figure that out, and if you can't, I'm sorry, I'm not going to refilm all those parts.
One of the biggest complaints that Naruto fans had when becoming Boruto fans, outside of Ikemoto's changing and drawing style and Gaara and Naruto's haircuts, was that the established lore from Naruto Shippuden, specifically surrounding the beginnings of the ninja world, most of which they came from Hagoromo and Kaguya's exposition dump in the 4th Great Shinobi World War, was almost immediately changed in Boruto, and seemingly in a way that disproved everything that we learned in Shippuden. That is to say that the explanation that we got from Kaguya and Hagoromo about how Kaguya was from a species of aliens who traipse around the cosmos looking for worlds that have been seeded by divine trees so that they could descend upon those celestial bodies and consume the fruits that these divine trees create, was immediately contradicted by the information that we got from the likes of Momoshiki and Ishiki in Boruto. That instead of Kaguya traveling through the cosmos alone, just happening to look for planets that were seeded by divine trees, instead what actually happened is that Kaguya was traveling from planet to planet with a partner in Ishiki, presumably looking for Shibai's body, so that they could make a divine tree on the planet that had Shibai's body and access his power. I mean, that's just a theory, but it's a widely accepted one. Thus, they came to Earth where they assumed Shibai's body was, with a 10 tails or 2 in order to get a power-up from Shibai's chakra. And this retconning, as it's conventionally accepted in the Naruto and Boruto communities, was fairly aggravating, because for the most part, it felt like an unforced error. See, because we know when Kaguya descended down to Naruto's story in the 4th Great Shinobi World War, Kishimoto was fully planning on the creation of Boruto. It's why she's introduced in the first place, and thus to establish lore through the introduction of Kaguya and Hagoromo that would just be contradicted a few years later when you were planning for that eventual lore to come out, either shows us that Kishimoto had very little plans for Boruto, or the disconnect in the lore between Naruto and Boruto was intentional. And while the substantially higher likelihood is that Kishimoto didn't know what he was going to do with Boruto while he was finishing off Shippuden, because he was being forced into making Boruto by his editors who didn't want the gravy train to end with Naruto. I mean, you're not going to be the first of the big three to end our anime, right? There is still a distinctive possibility, even if that possibility became a reality during the writing of Boruto, that the discrepancy in the lore between Naruto and Boruto is intentional. What do I mean by that? Well, good writing doesn't necessarily dictate that you need to plan your entire story from the second you sit down and start writing it. You don't have to have a concrete idea of what the ending of your story is going to be when you start it. No, good writing is keeping track of and understanding all the cards you've laid down thus far, and then over the course of your story, finding out the best way to play those cards. Which is why people like myself have already done massive deep dives on the possible explanations on why Boruto and Naruto's idea of Kaguya's descendants to Earth is different. And the major through line in most people's reasoning is that Kaguya wanted to be seen as a hero to humanity so that she could continue to use them to create her White Zetsu army. And if Kaguya immediately set herself up as an enemy of humanity, she wouldn't be able to as easily turn them into a White Zetsu army. But today I want to explore a different, possible explanation for this discrepancy. And the reasoning I want to explore today lies with our presumed final big baddie of Boruto, Shibai, and his shinjutsu, Omnipotence. Yes, that's right, because today, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking Shibai created the Retcon, which I'm aware as a title sounds ridiculous, and it's probably not going to be what we go with as a title, but it's all I can think of. But trust me, by the time you get to the end of this video, you'll realize that that title isn't as insane as it sounds. But before we get to moving this video any further forward, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you guys like the idea of crazy anime titles and half-hour-long anime videos, but don't want them to be about Naruto or Boruto, you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto or Boruto, I talk all other anime and manga. We just hit Kaiju number 8 season, baby! Or if you want something a little bit longer than just a half hour of content, go ahead and check out my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Or if you want to be decked out in anime gear 24/7, go ahead and meander on over into my merch store, otakusanonymous.net, where you can pick up some of the greatest anime t-shirts, sweatshirts, and sticker packs known to man.
But before we get into all that, today we're going to talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Factor. Factor is an absolute must for you this summer, as Factor allows you to fuel up fast on dietitian-approved, absolutely delicious meals that only take 2 minutes to get ready. And in these warm, sunny months, as some of us emerge from our winter caves, the idea of being stuck in grocery stores or the kitchen cooking up lunch or dinner is just not the play. But Factor offers so much more than just these delicious dietitian-approved and never frozen meals, as they also offer snacks, smoothies, and so much more. They provide you with a wide variety of easy options for your day, whether that be breakfast, midday bites, or anything else. And let me just tell you, Factor plays a massive role in my life. As somebody who runs 3 YouTube channels and is in the process of making a 4th, I don't have hours to spend thinking about what I'm gonna eat and preparing it. But at the same time, fitness and health is massively important to me, which is why Factor's fresh, never frozen, dietitian approved, and delicious meals are huge for me. But there's a big difference between telling and showing. So let's head down to the kitchen and show you just how delicious these meals are.
Today we're making some creamy Parmesan chicken.
And making a Factor meal is as easy as taking that slide off, poking a couple of holes in our foil here, and throwing this meal in the microwave for a grand total of 2 minutes.
And now for the all-important taste test. Somehow that chicken is still incredibly juicy, it's well seasoned, it's perfect.
Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code NCHammer2350 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next box. That's code NCHammer2350 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while your subscription is active. It's time to take back your time.
So, Omnipotence. It's one of the most terrifying abilities in all of anime. The ability to do anything. The programming code of the gods, it's coined by Momoshiki. An ability that allows incredibly powerful Otsutsukis to create entire planets, or cast worldwide or universe-wide genjutsus that switch the roles of 2 people on Earth. It is truly Omnipotence, an all-powerful ability that allows for anything, anywhere, anytime to happen. And yet, fortunately for us and the good guys in the Boruto universe, we've only ever seen Omnipotence used twice, and both of those times it was used by Ada, who has used it most obviously, to switch the positions of Kawaki and Boruto in everybody's minds on Earth, making Boruto the murderer of his adoptive father Naruto and Kawaki a grieving son. B, less notably in response to wanting to be loved, Ada has also used Omnipotence to create her charm shinjutsu, which makes every person she meets fall in love with her immediately. And that nobody outside of a full-fledged Otsutsuki has the ability to lay a hand on Ada. And while the 2 of those instances sound incredibly broken, mostly because they are, what we've seen from Ada thus far may only be a fraction of what we could see from somebody like Shibai. See, like I already said, Momoshiki referred to Omnipotence as the programming code of the gods, the most powerful shinjutsu in the entire universe. And since shinjutsu are the all-powerful abilities that all jutsu on Earth are apparently watered-down versions of, this makes Omnipotence the most powerful ability in the entire universe. Which, once again, makes sense when you consider the fact that it's called Omnipotence, all-powerful. But Ada, who isn't an Otsutsuki, can only use this ability to manifest her deepest desires, like wanting to be loved and wanting to appease Kawaki. However, Shibai, who is most definitely a full-blooded Otsutsuki, and an upper-ranked one at that, and that will be important down the line, could presumably use Omnipotence to achieve anything, on a whim. I want spaghetti right now. Cool, there's spaghetti in my hands. I want there to be an Earth 2 electric boogaloo. Cool, it's over there. And it's a high possibility that Shibai was using it like this. As when we see Ada use Omnipotence for what we believed was the first time, but was actually the second time, when she brainwashed the entire world to switching Boruto and Kawaki's roles, Momoshiki says something rather interesting. See, Momoshiki, while giving us an exposition dump on how Omnipotence works, says to Boruto, and I quote, "Have you never considered how many times an Otsutsuki who became God used Omnipotence to rewrite humanity's memories?" Which is a wild thing to say to Boruto in that specific moment. Because 1, Boruto in this moment had an insane amount going on, as he had literally just been swapped with Kawaki and had the entirety of Konoha chasing him as the murderer of Naruto. And 2, because Momoshiki was in the process of explaining how Omnipotence works to Boruto when he asked them that question. And thus to say, have you never considered the entirety of history and how it might be rewritten by the existence of this ability while I'm explaining to you how this ability works for the first time is weird. Because wow, I wonder if this has ever happened before would not be the first thing I thought about when I was getting explained to the fact that there's an ability that is able to rewrite the memories of every single person on Earth, and it directly affects me. And thus this moment, to me and a lot of other people in the community, signaled that this was a Kishimoto never doing anything for nothing moment. That this moment was in fact Kishimoto telling us that yes, humanity has been affected by the powers of Omnipotence in the past. But how, and maybe more importantly than anything, Why? Well, it's important to note that out of the original journeyers to Earth, those being Ishiki, Kagi, and possibly Shibai, only one of those three people has ever given us a reason as to why they came to Earth. As Kaguya stated that she was following divine seeds that fall off meteors onto planets and grow divine trees. And yes, I'm aware Momoshiki does give us a reason for coming to Earth, but his reason for coming to Earth is cleaning up after Kaguya's mess. See, the important takeaway here is that Ishiki or Jigen never tell us the reason that they came to Earth. And as we now know from the information we got in Boruto, Ishiki was in charge of this Otsutsuki duo, and was therefore absolutely the person calling the shots on what planets they should go to. But we know with relative certainty that Ishiki and Kaguya were not the first Otsutsuki duo to Earth. As at the Kara hideout, the first time that Sasuke goes there, there is 3 sets of 2 Otsutsuki symbols. A set for Kaguya and Ishiki, and a set for Momoshiki and Kinshiki, with a 3rd set all the way to the right that has very clearly been purposely destroyed. And this is an aspect that's rarely talked about. See, while some people say that the 3rd set of symbols is just so old that it's decayed and therefore has become destroyed, that's not really the case. There is only signs of destruction over the 2 symbols, which appears to denote that either later people like Kaguya, Ishiki, Momoshiki, or Kinshiki destroyed these symbols, or the original set of Otsutsuki who these symbols were supposed to memorialize destroyed them themselves. And since we can, with some certainty, at least say that Shibai was either in the Kara dimension or Earth, as Amado was able to, with the help of Ishiki, take parts of Shibai's body and graft them onto Ada and Daemon to give them shinjutsu.
I just realized for this entire video, my camera was also recording my audio on top of the mic, so hopefully my editor can figure that out, and if you can't, I'm sorry, I'm not going to refilm all those parts. However, because there was clearly symbols that existed before Kage and Ishiki symbols, and because the Occam's razor explanation is that Shibai's body ended up in either the Kara dimension or on Earth, it's safe to assume that that 3rd set of symbols belongs to Ishiki and his underling. And no, it's not Toneri and Oroshiki. They didn't know each other existed until Oroshiki froze Toneri for the next 10,000 years. So why would Shibai and his underling possibly have their symbols destroyed? Well, presumably, it could have been done to cover their tracks. See, I believe that Shibai, possibly after consuming a chakra fruit from Earth, gained enough power to finally ascend to godhood. But in order for this to happen, he would first have to sacrifice his underling to a Ten-Tails in order to create a divine tree on Earth. And therefore that underling would need a karma marking on an individual to reincarnate into, who would presumably be a human. But this brings up the semi-valid question, but Nick, if Shibai consumed a chakra fruit from Earth, how does Earth still exist? Because for all intents and purposes, I thought that the second that a divine tree was grown and a chakra fruit was plucked from said divine tree, that all of the energy of the Earth was encapsulated into that fruit. And while that rhetoric is being pushed in Boruto, there's a lot of evidence to prove that that's not actually the case, at least in most circumstances. See, both Kashin Koji and Boruto have multiple times referenced to the idea that if Boruto or Kawaki is caught by any of the claw crimes, it will spell the end of the world. However, we have a fair amount of evidence to prove the fact that just one divine tree isn't usually enough to destroy an entire planet. See, this evidence comes from both Naruto and Boruto, as we've seen in both of these pieces of IP, that usually one divine tree isn't enough to sap an entire planet out of all of its energy. In Naruto, Kaguya successfully consumes a chakra fruit of the divine tree that she followed down from the cosmos, and that fruit was so powerful that it not only awoke her and therefore the rest of humanity to chakra, but also gave her a Rinne Sharingan, a dojutsu we haven't seen replicated since. And that tree, oddly enough, was only consuming the life energy of those dumb enough to get close to it, which makes many internet sleuths, such as myself, believe in actuality that what was powering this tree was actually Shibai's body, because the tree itself hadn't consumed that much nature energy, or even the energy of that many people. And thus the only rational explanation for how Kaguya got that strong with just one chakra fruit is that somehow it ties into Shibai's power. And in Boruto, in the moment that we were introduced to Momoshiki and Kinshiki, they were standing on an unknown planet that they had destroyed in order to make an orchard of sorts of divine trees. Yes, in this moment that we're introduced to Momoshiki, he's standing on a planet with at least 12 divine trees growing out of it. And the first thing that we ever see Momoshiki do is actually eat the chakra fruit from one of these trees. And knowing what we know now about the growth of divine trees, this means for every single one of these divine trees, Kinshiki had to be fed to a Ten-Tails. And thus this planet was operating as a farm of sorts for both Kinshiki and Momoshiki to grow as many divine trees as the planet would give them, and thus perpetually and incrementally increase Momoshiki's power. And the idea that Kinshiki was the seed that made all of these divine trees holds a fair amount of water, because we know the stronger the Otsutsuki used to create a divine tree, tree, the stronger the chakra fruit, and the higher possibility that that one divine tree will sap all of the energy of the planet in one fell swoop. And since Kinshiki is probably the weakest Otsutsuki we've ever seen, it would make sense that using him as food wouldn't allow you to take over a planet with anything less than 12 divine trees. This also actually explains why both Kashin Koji and Boruto believe that if Boruto or Kawaki are caught by a claw grime, it will spell the end for Earth. Because think about it, Gaara probably stands a fairly good chance in a 1v1 against Kinshiki, who for all intents and purposes was defeated by Korotsuchi, Chojuro, and Darui, three of the weakest Kage of all time. And Boruto is now stronger than fused Momoshiki. He is substantially better food for Ten Tails than Kinshiki could ever be. And the same could be said for Kawaki, who holds onto the powers of Ishiki. And thus either of them, if fed to a claw grime, would be the strongest Otsutsuki we've ever seen create a divine trait. That's not the only similarity between Ishiki and Momoshiki. See, both Ishiki and Momoshiki, rather interestingly, are upper rank Otsutsuki, shot callers, royalty. And that's something they share in common with a certain somebody whose body was possibly left on Earth when Shibai ascended to godhood. So think about this for 1 second. The body of the most powerful, most prolific, most godhood adjacent upper rank Otsutsuki of all time was left on Earth. And if either Boruto or Kawaki were fed to a claw grime, it would create a divine tree that would be able to absorb all of the chakra of the Earth, something that other divine trees haven't been able to do. Then the body of Shibai, which is still very much physical, would be the ideal food for a divine tree. The kind of body you would only need to use once to ascend to godhood. And thus the person who was able to consume the chakra fruit of a divine tree created with Shibai's body would skip all of the steps he needed to take for thousands of years to achieve what he had already done, achieve godhood. But the Otsutsuki, from everything that we've seen, are incredibly jealous and prideful, who obviously don't like being used, especially amongst the upper ranks, as food for Ten Tails. And I can only imagine that this problem gets worse the closer to godhood they get. And thus those who do achieve godhood probably don't want others to achieve it as well, especially if it comes at the cost of the consumption of their body. So what does Shibai do just before ascending to godhood? He uses one last omnipotence on the entirety of the observable universe to make sure that the Otsutsuki looking for his body never find it. But a lot of you are probably saying,
But Nick, omnipotence doesn't work on Otsutsuki. That's why Momoshiki knows about it, because if Momoshiki was affected by omnipotence, then he wouldn't know how it works, because if you're affected by omnipotence, you forget how it works, even if you're told. And since Momoshiki was able to describe to Boruto how omnipotence works, that means he's never been affected by it.
and you're right, that line of logic holds up, and I'm proud of you for making that point. Unless the knowledge of omnipotence was placed into Momoshiki's mind to make him believe he was never affected by it. But that's too complicated to be a feasible theory yet. But there is an important distinction to make here. See, Momoshiki is an upper-ranked Otsutsuki, royalty, a shot caller. But the Otsutsuki, much like the Hyuga, who happen to come from the Otsutsuki, exist in a caste system. And what did the Hyuga teach us about trying to perpetuate a caste system for thousands of years? All while insulating their clan's most prized possession in secret from the rest of the outside world, the Byakugan. That control, especially in the form of a jutsu, goes a long way. And thus, while people like Boruto and Momoshiki have shown resistance to omnipotence, it's unclear if Boruto is actually resistant to omnipotence or because of the way that omnipotence works, since it's affecting him and doesn't change his memories. And the same thing could be said about Kawaki, who was the caster. It's entirely possible that the perceived resistances of Momoshiki, Boruto, and Kawaki tie into the fact that they all tie their powers back to being higher ranked Otsutsukis, which could explain why Code, who worked in servitude to Ishiki as a lower ranking Otsutsuki of sorts who bore his white karma marking, which should make him into a full Otsutsuki, is affected by omnipotence when Kawaki, who bears a black karma marking, isn't. And thus a large part of this theory would hinge on the fact that omnipotence is used by higher ranking Otsutsuki to keep lower ranking Otsutsuki complacent, so that they continue to sacrifice themselves hundreds to thousands of times over and over and over again for their upper ranks. And thus before ascending, Shibai, who was presumably most concerned about his own lower rank using his body to create a divine tree and then immediately meet him in godhood, used omnipotence on the entire universe to erase the memories of the first invasion of Earth and to eliminate the idea that Shibai's body could be found on Earth and therefore used in a divine tree from all people who weren't upper ranked Otsutsukis. And this omnipotence blast went so far as to eliminate all physical evidence that Shibai in his lower rank had ever even been on Earth, like the destruction of their two symbols at the Kara hideout. And thus, when Shibai's lower rank reincarnated in a human, they would be unaware of why they were on Earth, but they would have the knowledge and the expertise of thousands of years of working as an Otsutsuki. And therefore, the story of how Kaguya got to Earth and and why she went there in the first place was warped by Shibai, who had the ability to sway her as a lower-ranked Otsutsuki. And thus, when she descended to the earth with Ishiki, instead of realizing that they were there to create a chakra fruit out of Shibai's body and gain a bounty of power untold to the rest of the universe, she, possibly broken out of the caste system ideology imprinted in her brain through the power of omnipotence, decided to stand up against Ishiki, which is why she attacked him. Because here's the thing. This kind of thing happening has already been foreshadowed by Ada, who told Sarada and Sumire when they were visiting her in the early chapters of Two Blue Vortex that there is no way to undo the brainwashing created through omnipotence. However, she could, with their help, send out new memories with omnipotence to possibly right the wrongs that she unknowingly created by trying to make Kawaki's will reality. But she did say that the second blast of omnipotence could have possible unforeseen consequences. And then this premise is never talked about again. But here's my thing. A second blast of omnipotence is a legitimate answer to Boruto's current gripe. Yeah, there is obviously a possibility that Ada doesn't get the omnipotence blast correct the first time. And sure, maybe there's a possibility that Sarada and Sumire are affected by omnipotence the second time around. But Ada knows that Sarada and Sumire want Boruto to be able to come back to the village. She also feels bad about what she did to Boruto, and thus her creating a reality where both Kawaki and Boruto can coexist in Konoha isn't out of the scope of her abilities, especially with Sarada and Sumire there to act as catalysts. But what if in this moment when Ada was talking with Sarada and Sumire about the idea of blasting out an omnipotence wave to counter another omnipotence wave wasn't really, at least to us the readers, about the true unforeseen possible circumstances of Ada undoing the problem she created, but was instead said to set up the precedent that omnipotence used to counter omnipotence leads to some issues, but instead was meant to act as foreshadowing to us, to tell us about a previous time when two omnipotent ideologies clashed, which possibly, even for a brief amount of time, could have broken Kaguya out of her caste system ideology that she had presumably been stuck in for thousands of years. Because if, in fact, Kaguya did know that her and Ishiki were heading down to Earth to create a chakra fruit from Shibai's chakra, wouldn't it stand to reason that after ripping Ishiki in half and using his legs to create a new divine tree, that she would have consumed that fruit immediately, instead of hunkering down with Tenzo and catching a couple rounds of horizontal tango? No, the much more reasonable explanation is that immediately after she jumped Ishiki, she would eat the chakra fruit and not wait for Tenzo to turn on her. And yes, I'm aware that what happens with Tenzo is technically filler. It's not manga canon, but it's also the best and only explanation we have for how the alien got piped. On top of this possible explanation also explains why Ishiki had to bring Shibai's body to Amado. This is because many people, myself included, believe that Amado was somehow tied to Shibai, with some people going so far as to say that Amado is Shibai's lower rank Otsutsuki. Because if Amado is truly connected to Shibai in any capacity whatsoever, he should have known where Shibai's body was. And considering the fact that Code, with the help of Amado, was able to create the portals that allowed for people with no space-time ninjutsu to travel between the Kara dimension and Earth, we can't necessarily use the excuse Amado doesn't have space-time ninjutsu and therefore if Shibai's body wasn't on Earth, he couldn't have found it. But there also appears to be evidence, if you believe him, that Amado can be affected by omnipotence. And thus, if he is Shibai's lower rank, that's possibly proof of the theory that omnipotence can be used against lower ranking Otsutsukis. On top of this theory also explains the kind of woogity details surrounding Kaguya and the Ten Tails. Because so far as we understand in the Boruto universe, a Ten Tails is its own separate entity. You feed a lower ranking Otsutsuki to the Ten Tails, it creates a divine tree, you eat the chakra fruit, the divine tree breaks. However, according to Naruto, after Kaguya absorbed the divine tree, she was able to turn into the Ten Tails. And this is consistent with Madara, who also absorbed the divine tree. But that's backwards so far as we know from what's supposed to be canon and correct content in Boruto. If we go with the idea that the real reason that there's two Ten Tails on Earth is because Shibai brought one and Ishiki brought one, and we stick with the ideology that a lower ranking Otsutsuki has to be fed to said Ten Tails in order to create a divine tree, Kaguya absorbing a divine tree and then turning into the Ten Tails actually kind of makes a little bit of sense, because one of the biggest question marks hanging over the entirety of the Boruto community is why do we have two Ten Tails? Did Ishiki and Kaguya bring two? Did Ishiki realize that the one that he brought with Kaguya got split into nine-tailed beasts and got another one? Or was the bigger, badder Ten Tails that eventually was split into the nine-tailed beasts originally Shibai's? And thus, by absorbing the divine tree left behind by Shibai and his lower rank, she was able to, in essence, tap into the power of the latent Ten Tails that was used to create that divine trait. This explains why one of the 10 tails is a juvenile 10 tails, small enough to be kept in a cage, and explains why the other 10 tails was so powerful and large that it took 4 Hokage to box it in a barrier, and also Hashirama's Torii gates, which are said to be able to hold anything to the ground to even slow it down for a second. As this 10 tails, possibly brought by Shibai, could be thousands of years older than the 10 tails brought by Kage and Ishiki. And I know what some of you are saying, but Nick, Kage and Ishiki came to Earth 2,000 years ago. You're right, they did, but the Otsutsuki are immortal. We don't know how long 10 tails live for. We don't know what their gestation period is. We don't know how long it takes for them to get full-sized. And we also don't know, because of Naruto, whether or not a 10 tails can be resuscitated after being turned into a divine trait. But evidence seems to point in the direction of yes, they can be. And thus it's probably safe to assume that Shibai, in some capacity or another, was using that 10 tails for thousands of years. Thousands of years before either Kaguya or Ishiki made it to Earth, because remember, it took Momoshiki 2,000 years to find Kaguya. So all in all, Shibai, in an attempt to make sure that he remained the strongest Otsutsuki in existence, used Omnipotence to brainwash all of humanity and all lower-ranking Otsutsuki to hide the location of his body and erase the memory of the first invasion. And while he couldn't affect higher ranks like Ishiki by sowing discord between the higher ranks and the lower ranks coming to look for his body, he was able to ensure that his body would specifically never be used to create a divine trait, at least before it decayed too massively to be used. Because here's the thing, we all know that Amado and Ishiki were able to get their hands on Shibai's body, and therefore it'd be incredibly logical to ask the question, why didn't they just throw Shibai's body into the mouth of the juvenile 10 tails and turn that into a divine tree? That would be not only very easy, but also incredibly broken. As we've already established, that would create the strongest chakra fruit ever known to man. And while some of you are going to say, well, you can't use a dead Otsutsuki, the conventionally accepted ideology for how Kaguya was able to create a chakra fruit in the first place is that she used Ishiki's legs. And if you want to try and explain it with any other answer that isn't that, the only other possible answer is that somehow Shibai made a divine tree that grew a chakra fruit and then ascended before eating it. Or that somehow a divine tree made 2 chakra fruit. Everything that we know Boruto-wise shows us that Kaguya needed some kind of food to feed to a 10 tails. And if you can use somebody's legs, you can use a corpse. But it's a possibility, and a pretty firm one at that, that over the course of 2,000 years, Shibai's body is decayed to a point where he can't be fed to a 10 tails, and if he was, it wouldn't really be worth it. Because even though we've been using Hashirama's cells for 100 years, that's just cells. That's easy to get. If just the legs of Ishiki created a divine tree that could only take energy from those who were dumb enough to get close to it, then a 2,000-year-old corpse isn't going to do much for you. And thus Shibai, whose name in Japanese directly translates to a play or a playful performance, which is usually used in Japanese or Hawaiian as a way to say somebody is being overtly deceitful in a way that's so over the top and so obvious that it might as well be a play they're putting on, is the biggest deceiver in the entire universe. A powerful entity making sure that nobody, be they human or Otsutsuki, ever steps into the realm of his power through his most powerful shinjutsu, Omnipotence. And thus, while it might not have been planned to be this way originally, good writing dictates identifying the cards that you have and using them in a way that makes a retcon an opportunity. But will all of this happen? Will Kishimoto truly pull a rabbit out of the hat and make this retcon disappear? No, it's probably just gonna be a retcon forever. Thought experiments like these keep me on my toes and make me excited about the prospect of one day when I eventually get the balls to write a story of my own. If you guys liked this possible explanation for how the retcon happened and how we could get out of it, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Yeah, I'm aware that some of you like it pronounced omnipotence, but I got an angry email yelling at me about pronunciation, so omnipotence it is. I don't care.